If we want a future where you have the option to buy milk from your local farmer, eggs from your local farmer, food from your local farmer, now is the time to support your local farmer, because 80-something% of farmers are working a second job, which means they're losing money growing your food.
Nothing you do matters unless what you do matters. I'm Amadon, DellErba, and this is Get Real or Die Trying.
How are we doing, tribe? Amadon, DellErba here with Get Real or Die Trying podcast. I am in Texas, and I am very excited to be sitting down with Mollie Engelhart on her beautiful farm here with her family, Sovereignty Ranch. She is a chef. She runs a restaurant here called The Barn. She is a farmer. She is a mother. And she has quite the story of leaving California, which I'm looking forward to hearing more about, and what made her choose this beautiful land here and the lifestyle she has chosen to live and be an activist for the land and what she believes. So welcome on the show.
Thank you so much for coming out and checking out what we're doing out here and elevating the message of the land.
Absolutely. I love it. And I love what you and your brother are up to and what you're up to. And so, yeah, let's start with what brought you to Texas? I mean, I know you used to be in California, Venice. This is a big difference from your former life, and what's going on there?
I would say God brought me to Texas, if I was, to put it simply. But ultimately, I loved California. And if you had told me in 2019, pre-pandemic, in quotation marks, you had told me that I would move to Texas, I would have told you you're likely not telling the truth. And I would have said maybe I would have an apartment here or something if I was expanding my business. We were looking at Texas for more restaurants because the minimum wage and mostly because of actually workers' comp laws in California was getting to the point that we were paying almost $1 million a year in workers' comp with no major injuries. And so, because the punitive stuff like that. So we were looking at Texas for expansion possibly. But I was living my life best, worked super hard, built up this brand in the hardest state in the country to make a living in, and we're crushing it. And I'm selling my businesses for $25 to $31 million. We're going through the process. You have the company that's helping you sell, and it goes out to these different people, and people put offers, you get the offers. And then once you get the offers, you have these kind of bigger deals don't just happen like, oh, I'm going to close escrow in 20 days.
Yeah.
It's like you have to go through all these processes. So 2019, I'm literally looking at a huge payday. I'm about to cash out my restaurant, Sage Vegan Bistro, for $25 to $31 million, depending on how I meet these specific markers and how the due diligence goes for the company that's looking at acquiring me. So fourth quarter of 2019, I hit it out of the park. Best fourth quarter we've ever had. I had a baby that quarter. I'm like, this is the best life ever. I'm about to retire. My third child is born, and I'm about to retire at 45 years old. This is amazing. Oh no, my fourth child. So I was 43. And so anyways, I get to first quarter of 2020, and I'm like, out of the park. We're trending like 9 million for the Culver City location for that year. And so we're looking at 31 million. We're looking at that high number. And then I'm not really paying that much attention to the COVID conversation. Like, there's this cruise ship off the coast of San Francisco, so And then 2 weeks to slow the spread happens in the second quarter. And the deal just stops, and everybody's like, well, we're going to pause and see what happens with hospitality. And it becomes very apparent very quickly that hospitality, at least in blue states, it's not 2 weeks to slow the spread. So I would say that this was a factor that the government, with a stroke of a pen, stole not only my 15 years of work that I put into this whole situation, but stole all of the revenue that I had coming in as well by saying no indoor dining for 2.5 years. I had 350 employees. I had 4 locations. I was a very popular place to eat in Los Angeles. And so all of that led to, starting to have the conversation. Simultaneously, I had bought a farm in 2018 and I'd moved to Ventura County and I was farming for the restaurant, keeping the food in the loop, being a regenerative agriculture activist or farmer. And I was thinking I could have an organic, regenerative, vegan farm. Obviously, I was wrong. That was a naive idea. But so this simultaneously, my mind is kind of being broken open that veganism is not the path forward for humanity. Veganism is probably started with good intentions, like so many of these movements. And then those good intentions get twisted into something that is divide, conquer, othering, and all of that. And so at the same time that I'm realizing regenerative agriculture is the path forward for humanity, I'm being robbed in California. And then the third thing that happened is the county came onto my property because I had housed a homeless family that was living in their RV during COVID, and the kids were remote school. They didn't have internet. They were parking in different parking lots, and there were 6 of them in an RV. And so because of that, the county came on, threatened to have a search warrant, blah, blah, blah. And again, with the stroke of a pen, almost $900,000 of corrections that they just want us to fix. And so all of those things led to us starting to look outside of California. And when I first bought this place, in all honesty, I thought I would stay in California. I loved California. I had beautiful live water, amazing avocado orchards and lemon orchards and lime orchards and row crops and just the most beautiful, sparkling, clean Sespe Creek running through. And I thought I was buying this to expand our business. And my thought, because I was still in the mind that we would get back to normal, was, well, I should keep expanding so that 25 million can come out the other side of COVID being more, right? But I was wrong. Like, I didn't realize that the culture of Los Angeles would forever change.
Yeah.
And that we would never go back to where we were. And so when I bought this place, it was to service restaurants in San Antonio and Austin and expand. But that shortly after buying this place, I realized that the bleed that we were bleeding too much money for me to expand. And the bleed never stopped. And I lost restaurant after restaurant after restaurant, closing my last 2 in January of this year during the fires.
Wow. Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that you lost, you probably put so much work, like you said, 15 years or more into building successful restaurants, and then to kind of feel powerless to see them, fade out with circumstances outside your control, It's one thing if we lose something because of our own doing, it still sucks, but at least we could take responsibility for, like, I tanked my business because of wrong choices. But when you lose something that really has nothing to do with you or outside your control, and it's just circumstances of, and you're probably an example of hundreds of people who lost restaurants and family-owned businesses and their life, because of these silly restrictions. And what's really sad is that in 2020, more new billionaires were made than any other year in history.
Yeah, I had people tell me all the time on the comments, like, well, you just didn't pivot good enough, or, there are lots of people. It's hard to, how do you pivot a restaurant when they're not letting you go into a restaurant? Like, that's a hard thing to pivot. And so, and I did pivot. We sold toilet paper, we sold paper towels, we did to-go, we did picnic baskets so you could go outside and do this. We did picnic basket with the blanket and the this and the that. I did a little indoor grocery store where we sold produce, and I tried almost everything that I could think of to pivot. I did government contracts to try to sell food to, like, people that were scared to leave their house, like delivering it right to their house. I did Bach grocery boxes, CSA boxes, pre-cooked meat, not pre-cooked, but like, yeah, pre-cooked frozen meals, like where you could get lasagna, family meals, family of 4, like economical, okay, tacos will deliver you tacos for the whole family for $99 to feed 6 people. Like what we tried so many different things. We did 10 frozen entrees for $100 so people could stock up and freeze their things. I mean, I pivoted and pivoted.
Well,
and
the people
pivoted.
who made money were the people in the medical industry, of course, as we know.
Yes, and I mean, I know someone who made money importing masks, and how they knew to import masks, I don't know, but made millions and millions of dollars importing masks that are filled with microfibers that are terrible for our lungs. So
masks don't even work, you know.
of course they don't work, and we were made to feel like we were stupid. I was breastfeeding or pregnant all of COVID, and I would say breastfeeding and pregnant all of COVID. And I remember multiple times where my child would not breastfeed while I was wearing a mask. And my employees, the only place in California that I wear a mask, and this is crazy, is in my own restaurants, because my own employees called the police, called the health department, and called OSHA on me for putting their life at risk.
Oh my gosh.
And so I would be sitting in a booth, like hovered in the booth, taking my mask off, because my child would not breastfeed while I had a mask on. It was a weird thing. Like he couldn't connect. And, you know, they changed all of the, the markers? Like he was way behind on speech. He's fine now, but he was way behind on speech development. And it's because he couldn't see people's masks. My other kids were fine because they were at home on the farm, not coming to the restaurant. But I was bringing this breastfeeding child with me to the restaurant where everybody was wearing a mask. And you see how that was. But to say like, oh, you guys just didn't pivot good enough, I just call bullshit on that. Like I was pivoting and pivoting and pivoting. And the other thing is the messaging for the government was like outdoor dining. It's going to all be outdoor dining. So then we'd spend $70,000 to make the outdoor dining more comfortable. We put a roof, we put heaters, we put all the stuff just in one location. That's one example. And then they said Friday night at midnight, more outdoor dining. And the woman who made this announcement for Los Angeles was elderly, older than 65, and overweight significantly. I'm not judging her for being overweight. I'm just saying these are the facts. Right after she made this announcement, she went out to eat at a restaurant and had outdoor dining. So if it was so dangerous, it was critical that we ended it. And she said, well, I was trying to support restaurants before this happened. So you were trying to support restaurants by shutting us down, but you decided to go have an Italian meal, and you think that like gluten, cheese, and tomato sauce was going to, it was so dangerous to be outside, but you're going to eat, like it doesn't make any sense. And so I was raised to be a critical thinker. And so I was shocked about COVID. And I mean, I guess that this should not be shocking to me, but I thought there was like no critical thinking. And I was also just shocked about how few of the people in my life had like true moral, like this is my stance and my stance doesn't change just because the government says something. Friends that were homeschooling their children so they didn't have to vaccinate them got vaccinated so they could go to a wedding in Cabo or to go on a cruise or to go just because they didn't want it to be difficult. And I thought, I don't understand. The whole time I was like, where are my Tesla goddesses at? Like all these Erewhon shopping, Tesla driving, organic food eating, yoga doing women who I saw as on the same team as me about body sovereignty, like it's my body and I should get to put what I want into it. Just collapsed.
Cave in. No real conviction, you know?
No real conviction. And that was my biggest lesson from COVID, is how little people are actually convicted in their beliefs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, COVID definitely revealed that. It revealed, on the other end of the spectrum, it probably showed that there are much fewer people, but the people who were convicted and stood strong and quit their jobs because they refused to get vaccinated and took a stand, those people kind of rised up, out of the ashes to be seen and spoke about it and inspired others. But so many people were just sheeple, just fall into line and do what they're told and don't take a stand. So how have you changed since coming to Texas? You started your farm here, your restaurant. You're here with your brother and some of your family and your kids. And have you? Do you feel like you've changed, or you just always were like this in California, but has it amplified here? Do you feel more free to be your true self?
I definitely feel more free to be my true self, but I would say yes, I did shift over COVID. My mom is deep down the rabbit hole. She's been saying since every event since 9/11, like, this is the event that's going to wake up humanity and we're going to come together. My mom says that about every single thing, right? And so I grew up with that kind of mother, and I wasn't vaccinated. You could count on one hand how many times I've taken antibiotics in my life. I never go to the doctor, all that stuff, right? So there was no chance I was going to fall for the okey doke around any of that.
Yeah.
But I would say that I grew up in Ithaca, New York. I lived in Los Angeles. I was highly indoctrinated into the general liberal sphere, the general idea that everything that was coming out of the left was like about tolerance, and that they were the tolerant side and they were the environmental side. And that the Republicans were racist. And I have a Mexican husband who came undocumented. I have 4 Mexican children. I have an adopted son from Guatemala. So I had this thought in my head that was right. But I was already, because of other things, I was already pro-life way before COVID. But then when my brain broke about veganism, like, there is no veganism, all food is grown with blood meal and bone meal and poop, and there's death on every plate.
Part of the cycle.
Part of the cycle of life. And I recognized that. And then I was already pro-life. And then Nord Stream pipeline made me realize, like, the left can't have any semblance of claiming anything about the environment, and the constant pushing of windmills and solar panels, but not really pushing the reality of regenerative agriculture. And then the villainization of carbon, which is just a psyop to have us feel like we don't belong here. See, the underlying message in the whole environmental movement as it's being pushed out is to have you think you are a scourge on the planet. You are a plague on the planet. You might as well not procreate. And yes, it's okay that we're being poisoned because we're really the problem. And so if we poison ourselves out of existence, it will be okay. And that's the underlying message. And you laugh, but that is really that is really the underlying message. Carbon is bad. And you know what you breathe out? Carbon. Do you know what you're made out of? Carbon. You know what your carb does? Carbon. And so you are bad for the planet. That is ridiculous. We belong here. We are the keystone species. And so when we forget that we belong here, yes, we can let them poison us. We can let them make us infertile. And so I had all of these realizations through the observation of nature, really, because I was farming and all this crazy stuff came out during COVID. And I just was like, wanted to be a truth seeker. And my thoughts were, nature has the answers. It is God's design expressing all the time. And can I take these constructs that are being thrown at us and take them to nature? And I basically realized that everything we're being told is a lie. And for whatever reason, they want us to lie constantly, these little lies, these agreeing with things that are not true all the time. And so I definitely feel more free and less afraid in Texas to say the things that I believe. But I was still pretty free to say what I was going to say in California. It just didn't go well. People were always...
Maybe it wasn't received as well as it might be here.
It wasn't received as well. But I definitely was outspoken all through COVID. And I wasn't afraid to say what I thought because it seemed so logical. Everything seemed so incredibly logical. But I do think that the left-right paradigm, all these different paradigms are being used. There is more slaves than there is masters. And the only way for the masters to keep us enslaved is to have us fight against each other and have that energy and that fire that's in all of us to be free. If I think that this guy that hates immigrants is my enemy, like, then I focus my energy on him. And
Yeah.
every day people tell me on blah, 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 your husband's a criminal. And I'm like, okay, like, I love you and you're a reflection of God. Like, I'm not going to get into that.
The polarization
The
that they want.
polarization, because
Separation.
it's not beneficial and it's just not even real. Like, that guy, I can write an article about my husband being undocumented when you get here and I'll get all these. I can write an article about me growing marijuana for years and nobody's like, you're a criminal. Like, so it's like people are selective in their outrage. And I want us to remember that we should focus our outrage on the powers that be that must become the powers that were. And those, what we need to focus our attention on is the ever printing of money and debasing our hard work and the constant poisoning of us and making us sterile. So if we want to fight about everything else later, about microaggressions and who can have babies. Yeah, let's fight about that after we've secured our ability to have babies for the future. How about if reproductive rights meant that you and my children are capable to have children in the normal way by making love with their wife or their husband? Maybe that is what
kind of important
rights
detail
should
there.
be.
Yeah.
It is. And maybe we should secure the fact that every dollar that we work for, that we then give a percentage to the government for, and then they just print money out of thin air, some outside organization that's not even a governmental institution can just print money out of thin air to help control inflation. As far as I can tell, all they do is make inflation.
Increases it, yeah.
And increases it. If people understood the Ponzi scheme of fiat money and they understand that we're being poisoned into infertility, that the average sperm count of a man by 2040 will be 0 in first world nations, I don't think there's anything else that we need to be fighting for. Like clean food, clean water, no poisons. And then if we want to fight about microaggressions and who can have babies, like, I am happy. Once the future is secured, I'm happy to argue with you about who can have babies. But right now, I don't have time or energy to argue about whether my husband's a criminal or whether the men can have babies or any of the rest of it, because I want to secure a future where my children's fertility is not being robbed by chemicals and their future and our future wealth is not being robbed by the constant printing of fiat currency.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are like, let's just get back to the basics. They're like survival, like, where they want to keep us distracted, fighting over nonsense and debating things that there's really no room to
and
debate.
staying
frankly,
in the rat race.
Like,
of
what is a man or what
taxes.
is a woman? This conversation didn't exist, 40 years ago. Definitely didn't exist 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Did they sit around the fire debating about what a man or woman was? No. It's a result of a sick culture. That's a whole other subject. But
I think it's a result of a culture that's not under pressure.
yeah, I mean,
Like, we're all stronger under pressure, and basically our minds will find something to be upset about because it's our nature to be able to manage being under
when we're
pressure.
poisoning ourselves, they're poisoning us for a reason. You talk about the skyrocketing infertility rates, both men and women, but also men's testosterone rates, unbelievably low. The average 17-year-old today has the same amount of testosterone a 70-year-old had in the 70s.
But it's crazy. And I talk about this.
And so when you reduce the hormone levels too, and you get human bodies out of balance as God intended them to be, especially a man, that creates a weak man, easy to control. The mind's not functioning. We're not functioning as men like we should be if we're like at that level of low testosterone.
Yeah.
And so these endocrine interrupters and these hormone interrupters that are all part of our society, through the microplastics, through the Wi-Fi, through the seed oils, through everything, basically, the commercialized packaged product food, all the chemicals. I think there's a design behind it. We know that there's, people think you're crazy when you start talking about the global elite trying to create infertility because they have such a strong opinion that the planet's overpopulated, so they're trying to decrease the population.
But we're actually in a, at least in first world nations, we're actually in a collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea that we're overpopulated is not necessarily true.
Well, and it's also, how about instead of looking at overpopulated, that we just aren't living in connection with the earth as humanity.
100%.
We're not living smart. We're over-consuming. We're using the earth instead of giving to it and living with it. And so, to me, the conversation isn't, oh, there are too many humans on earth. It's, why are we living like we're living on the earth and taking advantage and hurting the earth? Change how we live, like what you're doing here, like how I live my life in an eco-village and farm and connected to nature and more awareness to where the water comes from, where the food comes from, how it's grown, the cycle of life, And I like how you had that realization of coming out of, what a 180. You had successful vegan restaurants in California, and then you're like, oh, well, and it's cool that from my understanding, from what you're saying, it's kind of farming that got you into like the realization, like, whoa, there really is no veganism. And that's why I always thought too, what was funny is when you have these extremist vegans, because we had a vegan restaurant too, actually, for like 6 years in Tucson. And when these extremists, kind of radical vegans who make veganism their religion almost,
Not almost, for sure.
They do, yeah.
Religion.
Sometimes I want to say, have you ever been to a farm? Have you ever grown food? Have you ever been in that cycle? Because I bet you very quickly they would see that that's actually not true.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Such a massive part of it, and death and recycling and the reuse, the centrifugal reality of a seed being planted in the soil and growing into a plant that an animal is going to eat, and you eat the animal. It's all connected,
100%, it's all connected. And that is the realization. And that's what I write about in my book, Debunked by Nature, is literally that all these constructs that I believe to be true were actually dismantled by just the observation of God's design in nature. And
well, how about the fact that we've been eating meat for millennia as human beings, as Homo sapiens? Like, what are we, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, were we eating these fancy vegetables? No. We were eating meat and berries and whatever else we could find, And our ancestors, that's what we do, and like, oh, let's just change it all of a sudden. God didn't create us right. We're going to switch it.
Right. God didn't create us right, and we should get baby formulas better than breast milk. God didn't create, let's put our babies in another room from us while we're sleeping because that's so normal. All other mammals sleep next to their babies, but we put them in the other room. I mean, a cow will breastfeed for 9 months, and their life cycle is like 14 years. We in America are breastfeeding exclusively, not even high percentages, for 3 months. And then 6 months is like the next category. But like basically we don't breastfeed for
hardly anything.
Time. It's hardly anything.
Well, my kids did at least a year.
I did all my kids for my least amount of time was just before his 2nd birthday. And my most amount of time was 3 years. But I've been breastfeeding nonstop for 10 years right now.
Wow.
Because I had my first kid. Well, he's almost 11, I guess, in December. So in December, I'll have been breastfeeding nonstop for 11 years, 4 different children.
Wow.
But people think, oh, that's crazy, Mollie. Well, is it?
Or is it actually completely normal?
Is it completely normal?
Ancestral point of view.
And we've made it weird.
Yeah.
People get so weird about breastfeeding. People on Instagram will say like, oh, I saw you posted something and you were talking and you were breastfeeding. You were doing it for pedos and for clicks. And no, I'm actually just trying to normalize the normal human behavior.
There's nothing more natural.
Children.
Literally nothing more natural.
So it's we think it's totally normal for girls to like wear a thong and like pasties on their boobs and they can post it on Instagram.
Yeah.
And that is totally normal. Nobody's gonna call you a weirdo and say you're doing it for clicks and pedos. But you breastfeed your child while having a conversation. Oh, you're just a creepozoid. And this kind of thing are all the things that I looked at in my book and saying, why have we gotten so disconnected from what's normal that we think breastfeeding is something that should be hidden and put into a closet. It's not. We need to normalize normal behavior. And like, you know, National Geographics went around the world and took pictures of African women breastfeeding in public, and like we thought, oh, it's so weird. Like, no, like literally it's just normal. Cows don't go hide when they're breastfeeding. Nobody goes and hides while they're breastfeeding in most cultures around the world, unless hiding women is just part of the culture as a whole. But it's just not a thing. We don't do that.
Yeah. So what's been the most difficult thing for you to deal with or overcome since moving to Texas and starting your farm and restaurant? What have been some challenges for you besides probably everything? I mean, I'm a farmer. I live in a community too, in a farm, and was involved in a restaurant, so I know everything's a damn challenge.
Well, just getting people to care.
Yeah,
I guess that I'm from California, and I was in a community that was really committed to healthy food, really, and so people don't seem to really care that much about food out here. And that, I guess, is what I'm noticing, is getting customers to come out here to care. And I have some great customers that support so much, but I basically need to 10x that if we're going to survive. And so how do I educate the community in such a way? And I think in like the general kind of conservative sphere, there is an awakening happening, probably based on RFK joining Trump. And I do think that that's happening. I just don't know how quickly I need it to happen more quickly than it's happening. And so I would say that the biggest problem, and I don't want to say problem, but the biggest thing that we're trying to get done is to get more people out here, to get people to come and to show up. And it's very hard to staff, because some days it's like all these people come, and then other days it's like, oh, there's 5 people here. Like how, yesterday was like Friday night and you were here, you saw it was like random, just a few guests for dinner, which is random. But so right now we're just running on very low staff, but then that sometimes means not great service when it is busy. But how do we manage for that? So, and you know, it's a different world out here. So whatever would work advertising wise in California is not going to work here. And so I'm trying things I never would have tried in California. I have billboards. I'm doing like on the back of the receipts at the grocery store. I'm doing different things, trying but because.
So you are advertising and marketing.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's the first step. A lot of business owners and startups, I mean, you're a businesswoman, you've had successful restaurants, so you know, but a lot of people don't know, surprisingly, the importance of marketing. You know, like, you can have the greatest thing in the world. If nobody knows about it, you're not going to survive.
Oh, no. I'm marketing. I also go on hundreds of podcasts. Yeah, you market. I'm on Instagram every single day, Facebook every single day. Yeah. I'm not good at TikTok. I put up stuff, but it's not, for whatever reason, I'm not good at that. But I post every day on all the platforms. I post every day. And so I think that I do the work, but how to get people out here. And people that come love it. And so just how to get them to, I think that we're all addicted to our comfort. And so trying to find a pathway to get people to be willing to surrender some of their convenience for what's right, that's pretty hard in this society. And so in inviting people to drive 45 minutes to come get their meat, to come get their eggs, to come get their milk, to come get a meal that's coherent with their surroundings. Yeah. How do I explain that in a way that has value to them? Yeah, I totally can relate, you know, just growing up in that culture, having a restaurant. And in Tucson, we had a farm-to-table restaurant. We sourced basically 90% of the ingredients in a 150-mile radius. You know, we grew a lot ourselves. And the stuff that we couldn't grow, we got from other farmers. There's just a few things like quinoa and grains that we couldn't, you know, we don't have the climate for, that we brought in, but very hyper-focused, local, you know, the locavore diet. And I think we were ahead of our time, because this was like, in some ways, in Tucson we were, because boy, we closed at least 8 years ago, and so, you know, we were open, and then it started getting a lot more popular, and at least in that city, the whole farm to table concept, organic, and people started getting educated. But when we were there, it was a struggle to get people to understand the value, or why do I have to pay so much for this? Yeah. Why? Because this is real food that was grown by real farmers. It's organic, that was harvested, that was brought here, that a lot more went into this than some commercialized agro,
field
It's
farming.
it's crazy because even when I switched my vegan restaurants from vegan to regenerative, trying to survive COVID, I think even the regenerative restaurant in LA was before its time. The vegans were so bad, and it was such a learning curve for people to know what that meant, regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
So I do think we're all ahead of our time in some ways. And the question is, can the times catch up with this place in the runway that I have?
Isn't it kind of funny to talk about being ahead of our times, but actually what we're doing, what you're doing is actually like the
Old
original,
school.
old school, like it's just, I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. It's really not about discovery. It's about unlearning and remembering. It's like, we're just trying to remember, like the whole movement to homesteading, getting back to the earth. I'm like, there's nothing new. It's just that humanity forgot how to live, and we got crazy.
100%
And now we're coming back to, like we got to re-educate, like, hello people, like for centuries, the last 100 years, we've really gotten away from like living off the land, being connected. And, how cool, like, I'm in your restaurant last night and eat the food and then have some raw milk, and a cookie afterwards, right from your, and that's how I grew up. And, that's a novelty for a lot of people though. They have no idea. Like, and the thing is, when they don't think about it, it's consciousness, they don't sit down and realize that the vegetables they're eating in this restaurant in the city they're in got shipped 2,000 miles, was harvested unripe, ripens in a box, has no flavor compared to, like, very few people have had a tomato fresh off of vine. Like, it's an experience they don't even know, because they eat these tomatoes that are just like water.
People always say, I hate tomatoes. I'm like, you don't hate tomatoes.
You just have no idea. Yeah.
You just have no idea. Yeah. And what about, okay, so there's lots of science showing that water has memory, and so much of our food is water. And so in that, there's a coherency to local food that's informing our cells, our mitochondria. But when we eat food from thousands of miles away, are we confusing our bodies?
Yeah.
Are we giving incoherent signals?
Yeah.
Now, for thousands of years, I think we've moved grain distances, we've moved spices distances.
Yeah.
But meat and vegetables
and dairy, has to be hyperlocal.
Were always hyperlocal until
Great
100
point.
years ago when the refrigerator was invented.
Great point.
And so I would say that, yes, dry store goods have traveled across the world and across the globe for a long time on ships, on whatever. But we have always eaten meat, dairy, eggs, and vegetables and fruit from within 100 plus miles, because when you're driving a horse, 100 miles is a far
That's a long,
It's a long way. And so to think about how in such a short time, there's the frequency, there's the EMFs, there's all that. But just what about the coherency of local food? What about food having the knowledge of the microbes in the soil in this area, and that knowledge being passed from the water in that food into your body?
Yeah.
And is that possibly creating or not creating health? And I suggest that it is.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're right. Definitely. So tell me a little bit about, your brother was a producer on Kiss the Ground. Did you have any involvement in that? Were you?
I was a board member for Kiss the Ground for many years.
That was the nonprofit he started before it actually became a documentary.
Yes, the documentary
I'm going to talk to him about next. But
yeah, the documentary was an expression of the story and of the nonprofit.
Yeah.
And we were both. He's founded it with his friend Finian, and he was he was like the leader of it, and through a series of unfortunate events that I'll let him tell you about, he was kind of dethroned as the leader of his own organization. And I sat on the board through that whole terrible time. But
who knows? He might come back, Think of Apple when they threw Steve Jobs out, and then years later they begged for him to come back, and
it could happen.
It happens.
He started a new nonprofit called American Regeneration.
Cool.
And so, but yeah, I was not involved specifically in the making of the film, but I was involved in the nonprofit which produced the film. On the board for many years. And it's really great work he's done. I don't know if you saw, I don't endorse anything that McDonald's does, but McDonald's just pledged a huge amount of money to regenerative agriculture. And I would just say that when my brother started this in his garage 10 plus years ago, 12 years ago, nobody even knew what regenerative agriculture was.
Yeah.
And so he did the work to bring this into the mainstream and make this a household term. And
true.
I would say that that work that he did is priceless for the world, but we have a lot more work to do. There's a full-on agrarian collapse happening. We've lost 170,000 farms in the last 8 years, according to Merrill West of the Farm Freedom Alliance. And so that's a collapse of a culture that's necessary for us to have sovereignty and for us to have rural life exist. And that's 1 in 15 farms was lost over the last 8 years.
Wow.
This is not possible to sustain this level of loss
Yeah.
and still have human life the way that we know it. So if we don't want to eat bugs and eat Impossible Burgers and printed food and mass corporate foods, this is now is the time. We do not have time to play around. And I'm not trying to use hyperbole or fear, but if we want a future where you have the option to buy milk from your local farmer, eggs from your local farmer, food from your local farmer, now is the time to support your local farmer, because we are all out here white knuckling it and suffering and working. 80-something% of farmers are working a second job, which means they're losing money growing your food. Think about that.
Yes.
The people growing your food are losing money to grow your food and working a second job in order to give them the privilege of working the 50 hours a week on the farm. They're working an off-farm job to cover the difference between their bills and what the farm is bringing in, which means they are losing money to grow our food. This is not a sustainable system.
There needs to be a systemic shift in consciousness with the appreciation for farmers and the importance of them.
But nobody's fighting for them. People are fighting for your 20-minute break and your 10-minute break and 15-minute break and don't work 4 hours without a break and blah, 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 blah. Think about that. And then think about that farmers are out here working in the hot sun, in the cold winter, and then going to some other job just to pay the bills, myself included, working an off-farm job in order to pay the bills. This system doesn't work. And if we want a food system that works, it depends on we the people, every one of us, spending our money on the small farm diet, the local farm diet. That is where our dollars need to be spent. But that means giving up some of your own individual comfort for the greater good. And we have forgotten how to do that.
Yeah, we have. And I think of someone nearby here who's always appreciated the farmers of America is good old Willie Nelson.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a few people, but in general, it's actually looked down upon, farming. It's like,
Well, it's part of the
young
green
people.
movement,
We've
psyop.
lost the young people. I mean, all the farmers are aging out, Young people have enough, they don't want anything to do with farming. They think it's not cool. They want to go make money on Instagram and TikTok and, tech world and blah, blah, blah. And
or they've
understandably,
been told it's bad
because
for the environment and that they're I see tweets that say stuff like, well, why do we even need farmers? Everything I need I can get at Kroger. Or why do we even need farmers? All the things we need you can get at the store. Like, where do they think it comes from?
Yeah, they're disconnected. Yeah. Well, what we got to start doing is, RFK, the Maha movement is very exciting to me personally. Whether you agree with red, white, blue, green, whatever silly politics, you can't deny that the health of our children is important.
I don't even know why.
If someone disagrees with Maha, it's like, it's not about Trump. It's not about this. It's about
the health of our children.
It's about the health of our children. So, get all that crap out of the way and support him and support what he's doing and support the future.
But how is it that
stop poisoning our children?
Argument? How is there could be an argument? Yeah. And I think it's crazy because I wrote about this recently in an article in New York Times, but I've been in the local organic food movement for most of my life. My dad owns Cafe Gratitude. I own Sage Vegan Bistro. My aunt worked at a co-op when I was growing up. I feel like I've been in the health food movement on some way for my whole life.
Yeah.
Could somebody explain to me when, like, all of a sudden the left is resistant to high quality, healthy, nutrient dense food because all of a sudden someone on the right is advocating for it. This is crazy. People, I see
Because they're
people.
disagreeing just because the person's on the right.
Yes,
Yeah,
and then it's all of a
wild.
sudden like it's totalitarianism to take red dye 40 out. Like I don't even think red dye 40 is as big of an issue as people are making it, and it's just a small gesture in the right direction. But to argue that it's somehow totalitarianism, as we all just get funneled into Peter Thiel's money slave system, and we're like totalitarianism is red dye 40. No. Taking it out. If you want to go buy red dye 40 and add it to your cereal, you are totally allowed to do that. Nobody's stopping you. We're just saying it's not going to be as a rule in the food that we're feeding our children. And, people advocating for fluoride in the water that for years I feel like that has been a left thing, and now all of a sudden the right's advocating. So, but I think right now is a moment that we can be a coalition of both sides of the aisle for our children's health.
Yep.
If the right doesn't just start resisting it on the basis of the left. I mean, the left's not resisting it on the basis that the right is now for it. Now, the right has largely been missing in this conversation for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that it's happening, but it's almost like didn't the left do a lot of these things that are now happening with RFK, with Moms Across America, with all of the different advocating that's happening?
Yeah, it is a good question. Why weren't they? Because they typically speaking, the left has and the left and the liberals have been environmentalists.
Yeah.
Just
if you go to a co-op,
and that's why I used to be, consider myself, I mean, 10 years ago, I would have been considered a Democrat left liberal because of my activism and my love for the environment, my environmentalism. Now I would never identify with the left or the Democrats or anything. Well, frankly, I'm neither. But I just think it's hilarious how things have just gotten so on the end of the spectrum there, and it's really, but that's what they want. The polarization, the separating humanity, keeping people fighting, keeping people disagreeing. Because when there's not unity, you can control. When you have factions, you can control. When people are united and unified, it's hard to control and brainwash and manipulate and poison.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what they're up to. So tell us about your book that just came out.
Debunked by Nature. It's a little bit of the story I told about leaving California, but it's also just looking at all these ideas through the lens of nature. So I look at racism, I look at breastfeeding, like I said, I look at masculinity and femininity, I look at comfort, I look at discomfort, I look at body positivity, but I look at it all through the lens of the farm and nature and ask these questions. Does this actually make sense? Or have we been kind of twisted with half-truths to think that it makes sense? And so that's why it's called Debunked by Nature, because most of the liberal constructs that I held to be true were actually debunked by farming, debunked by being in nature.
That's really cool. Yeah, it makes me think about, I grew up very connected to nature on a farm, harvesting my own food, harvesting my own meat at a young age, 5 years old, cutting the chicken's head off, on the block, but people might think that's crazy, but that's just the natural way of life, harvesting the eggs from the chicken coop, learning how to butcher animals and being connected. And I remember talking to someone in California one time about 10 years ago, and how they thought it was so unspiritual that I killed and ate food. And they were not vegans because of any health reasons, just more of the religious mindset of you're killing a living thing. I said, well, the plants you eat are living. Every plant you eat is a living thing. Hello, just having these conversations about that. But again, the reason why I bring that up, because you said debunked by nature. If people actually wanted to learn about connectedness, be in nature. I don't really have a lot of respect for people who live in a city, in an apartment, in a high rise, and they're trying to lecture me about, nature and what's right. And I'm like, excuse me, have you ever even milked a goat? Have you ever killed an animal or harvested an animal? Have you ever harvested? Have you ever planted a seed? Have you ever got dirt underneath your fingernails? I mean, have you done anything in nature? Get out of here. I don't need to talk to you about it. That's just kind of where I'm at now with it, after years of this rhetoric from people it's all theory and stuff, and they take this moral high ground. And it's so I really respect you and what you're doing. I think it's very cool. You're just on the land, you're doing it, you're learning as you go, you're
My kids
you're
are
fearless, because this is a bold move. Like, I know what it's like to try and to have an operation like this, to try and make it financially sustainable, to try and do this. It's a complete uphill battle.
It
And
is
there's very little. I don't want to like be a negative Nelly about it, but I mean, I think you can this is get real or die trying. And the real fact is, it's there's very little reward. Sometimes it feels like it happens. It comes and goes, but it's not like certain things. Like, and this, it's not like the glamour of being in Hollywood and having a restaurant and people loving it and coming in and the little articles being written and everyone's like, oh, this is the best vegan food and she's so cool and creative and look at this dish she made and she sliced this beet in a cool way and everybody's going crazy about it. Like,
no, it's not.
You don't
like
get that,
at all.
and that's all pretense. But that's what that's what a lot of what LA is. It's just a lot of pretense. But this is like real shit out here. You're literally shoveling shit and doing it, and you're in it.
For sure. And, my kids growing up with a totally, back to what you were saying about the death thing, my kids are growing up in a totally different construct and conversation around death than I did.
Yeah.
And my kids just saved up $135 and they bought 5 meat rabbits and they're starting a meat rabbit business. And they made a deal with their dad and he's going to kill them and vacuum seal them and they're going to market them and sell them and they're going to raise them.
$137 because that little guy got $2 last night, remember?
Yeah, he did get $2 last night. But, and they lost 2 rabbits died like in the first week. And then my son's like, well, I want a refund. I'm like, a refund from who? Like, I don't you can't get a refund. And he was like, well, can you give me my money back? Because we don't have the bunnies. And I'm like, no, you bought the bunnies died. If mommy buys a cow from somebody and then the cow dies in mommy's possession, mommy is out $3,000. You're only out $35 for the bunny, right? But people, even in my own family, are like, are you concerned about their mental well-being? They're going to raise these bunnies and then they're going to get killed. And I am not.
No, of course not.
Honestly, I think that kids have been around the harvesting and harvesting of animals, the killing of animals, the slaughter of animals for a long time. And it is actually a missing in our culture that we have separated from our food.
It's actually
in such a way that we
irresponsible
can
of us.
be so disconnected. And I watch people that live in high rises and do what they do and all that stuff. And like you're saying, order a steak at a restaurant and eat 2 bites and then like, oh, I'm full or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then just send it back. Like,
some people get off on leaving a full half a plate of food and half a glass of wine because they don't need to eat it. It's like they actually purposely do it as like a status symbol.
And
like, what?
My thought is that if you know what it takes to raise a cow, if you've pulled a calf from out of, you've bottle fed a calf because the mom died, any of those things, like, the work that goes into that steak and you wouldn't just leave it and not eat it.
Yeah.
And so we use every parts of the animals. We make bone broth. You saw my husband was making lard last night.
Yeah.
We do all of that here, and we use every part of the animal in honor of the sacrifice of that life. And I think that we should have reverence. We should treat our animals with kindness. And we should also utilize every part of them. We are so, in this country, we don't eat the guts, we don't eat the heads, we don't eat a lot of the parts of the animal that is important. And we get all that for free and we feed it to our chickens from the butcher here. But when I see how much meat gets thrown away, this is just one place that we're getting it from. And it's crazy. Whereas where my husband is from, the head would be eaten, the guts would be cleaned, everything would be eaten.
Organs,
the whole thing. But we've become so spoiled.
Yeah.
That food is so accessible through government subsidies that we don't even make bone broth. We don't even make, eat the head. We don't eat the brain. We don't eat any of that. And I think that level of opulence is kind of disgusting.
It is. And unfortunately, it's normal. And so back to the part of just educating people. Not that first question I asked you, or that question I asked you about what's the hardest thing, and you said just awareness, getting people to understand the value of what you had to offer here, and so that's what we have to do is keep educating, keep getting the word out there. Who are some of your heroes? Who are some people you look to for inspiration in this work or any work? Who do you draw from to kind of?
I think that
get lit.
This is going to sound like a weird and wide array, but I think that Will Harris, like taking that loan against his family land and totally regenerating the land, but also regenerating the whole neighborhood, the whole Bluffton, Georgia. I think that is an inspirational level of risk to take, to borrow the millions and millions of dollars to build his own packing plant. And so I would say Will Harris as of White Oak Pastures. And then this is like totally random, and like people are gonna be like, oh, he's a partial hangout and CIA, whatever. But I think that watching Tucker Carlson through COVID realize all the things that he had done was wrong and then acknowledge in public. I'm inspired by people that can say, I did this thing wrong. I believe something was wrong. He took full responsibility for full-throatedly endorsing a war that was not in our best interest. And he didn't just like move on like, oh, I had the best information that I had and I went with he was like, no, I was believing these things that were lies and I didn't really look beyond it. And I want to say that I was wrong. And I watched, and I was just to say this out loud, is like, I hated Tucker Carlson. I thought he hated my children. I thought he thought they were replacement, whatever, anchor babies, blah, 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 right? So I never even listened to him or heard him. But when COVID was going on, and at 8:00 at night, every night on Fox News, there was someone that was saying it was okay, in not so many words, it was okay to not comply with all the stuff that was destroying my life at that time. I started to listen. And then I started to listen to him talk about our JFK being a CIA assassination and having sources inside the CIA. So I'd talk to my liberal friends and I'd say, you guys don't think it's weird at 8:00 on Fox News what's happening? And then when he starts likening the mattress company, pillow company, my pillow guy.
Yeah.
Like, what if we said you could only, I just want to, and he does that whole thing about if we said you could only take an airplane if you had a My Pillow and you could only go to work if you had a My Pillow, would you not think we were carrying water for our advertisers, blah, blah, blah. I think that he demonstrated a level of bravery that I think that the ripple effect throughout the country is probably unknown. And not only did he represent this bravery, he continued to ask the question out loud, what is it that made people comply or not comply? And he said, I don't know. It doesn't follow socioeconomic, race, education. It doesn't follow any of these things. What was it that had, one guy at the bank say, no, I'm not putting my pronouns in my signature? What had people say, no, I'm not coming. If you don't want me to come to work tomorrow, I will not come to work tomorrow, but I'm not going to take that. And he continued to look at that and investigate that. And so regardless of what I know a lot of people think, what they think about him, I want to say that he inspired me, or he was a spark that had me continue on the truth-telling journey that I was on and feel the ripple effect of what he was doing in my own life. And that was, so I think that I think that Will Harris, and a lot of other people that stood up during COVID.
I can definitely appreciate that with both those guys. And yeah, I had a similar thing as you, Tucker. I used to just despise the guy. I couldn't watch him. I mean, his show on Fox, I was like, who is this guy? I just wasn't into it at all. And then when he left and started doing his own thing, and I started watching the Tucker Carlson show, and he wasn't under the banner of Fox and being constrained by mainstream media and what he could and couldn't say, and he just spoke what he wanted, and he was being real, and I was like, this is Tucker. I was like, this I like, and I started listening to him and seeing, I was like, this is pretty cool. Yeah, like you said too, he was humble. He admitted that he was wrong about things, that he was going about things in the wrong way, that he just, and now kind of seeing him and the people he has on his show too, I think he's very genuine in wanting to give people an opportunity to speak their truth through his platform. A lot of people get an audience and stuff, and then they're careful to manage their audience and control what's said and, craft it and they don't want to ruffle any feathers or offend anybody. And I like that he just doesn't, he doesn't give a fuck basically, and that's great. We need more of that,
I realized he was an environmental. When he was still on Fox, I realized he was an environmentalist. And so I realized we had more in common than we didn't have in common. When the whole those trains crashed in Ohio.
Oh yeah, and the spill.
And the spill, and nobody was talking about it. Nobody was concerned about the water, about these people. He just kept hounding and like, where are the government? Why are we not? What are Pete Buttigieg? Where are you? What's going on? And I remember, like, this was in after my awakening that the left was not really for the environment, but it was in that time frame, Rick, and I was like, oh wait, how do I have it like so binary in my head, that left and right, and like I had all this binary stuff. And so I'm just grateful for the way that he expanded my mind during that time, and had me remember the importance of listening. And I think that that's another one of his really great skill sets, is he's a very good listener.
Yeah. And, it's cool to see that there's other newscasters or personalities who've left their mainstream jobs. You got Megyn Kelly, which I think she was fired, and there's that whole scandal too with, the boss of Fox, and the sexual misconduct and stuff. And, but yeah, Megyn Kelly, Lara Logan has her show, and she's kind of, to me, I don't know much about her before, but she used to newscast for like CBS and more, left-leaning organizations, and she was a war correspondent. I always respected her courage, and during the Iraq War, I'd watch her over there and stuff. And then she kind of disappeared for a long time. And she went through some trauma. I don't know if you remember, like when she was over there, I think she got raped and attacked in one of those foreign countries. I can't remember which one. And she just disappeared for like years and years and years. And then she's resurfaced again. But she's now more like, totally Maha supportive, back to traditional, defending the structure of what a family is, what a man and woman is, basically common sense, which has gotten lost in this country. And now we have to like, common sense theology is, hilarious that we have to discuss what's already common sense because it's gotten so crazy.
It is crazy. And
then these
people
have taken a stand. Yeah, Glenn Beck.
Candace Owens.
Of course, Candace Owens.
There's a lot of people that have gone out on their own. And I think that that's important. And I think that we can agree and we can disagree. But I think that we have to be able to agree with people we don't like when they say something that makes sense. Yeah. And we have to love people that we don't agree with because we are not our ideas. Our ideas change over time. Yeah. We are a soul in a body, and that soul is not the ideas in which that soul holds. And because we all change, we don't believe the same things in our 20s that we do in our 30s and in our 40s and 50s. As we live more life, our ideas shift and grow and change. And so I think we have to remember that and not feel like we have to cancel somebody because they don't agree with one thing that I believe. That's not going to get us to a future that we want.
Yeah. And I think living off the land and being connected to the earth naturally creates a character in someone that doesn't get razzled by the small things. And because right now in culture, everyone wants to be offended by everything. Take offense to what was said, take offense, get their panties in a wad over anything. But when you live close to the earth, you can't do that because everything's trying to destroy your plant. Everything is trying to, you know what I'm saying? It's warfare.
Yeah.
Frankly, that's what it is. People romanticize gardening, but I joke, different climates are easier than others. But I joke in Arizona because I have friends, I want to plant a garden in my backyard. I'm like, okay, well, just know this. It is warfare. It's everything is trying to kill your plant, and you have to keep it alive. That's what gardening actually is. The sun, the hail, it's going to dry out. Animals, the deer are going to eat it. It's warfare. Also, there's beauty to it too.
Yes.
But you got to keep that thing alive, And, but when you live in nature, you're not going to be throwing a fit, because you realize that you're not in control of the grasshoppers that come and swarm and take over your plant, No. You're not in control when the deer jumps the fence or a pipe breaks and you thought your plants were being watered and they weren't and it was flooding somewhere else. And it's just like, okay, there's just so many constant variables and things that happen. You just have to flow through life and be like, okay. And I think that we're losing that in modern culture and technology. We don't flow through life. We just want to control everything. And, and it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we think we can control nature or even, we can't even control ourselves. The only thing we can control is ourselves, and people can't even do that. So,
and it's a level of surrender every day.
Yeah.
And people want everything to be like scheduled out to the minute with calendars and da-da-da-da. That's not how nature works.
No.
It's not, like I can have my calendar all scheduled, but if I have to pull a calf or I have somebody caught in a fence or whatever, then everything else stops. You have a sick animal you need to deal with, like that, everything else has to stop. And so farming is about adaptability. And we have lost so much ability for resilience and adaptability in our culture because we've made it like anytime you are uncomfortable, something is wrong. And we have all these like trigger warnings in college. You don't have to come. We're going to talk about rape today. You don't have to come. We're going to talk about racism today. You don't have to come. Like, how about I have calluses on my hands because discomfort built up and made me stronger. This idea that we have to medicate discomfort, we have to avoid discomfort. What if we learned to remember that leaning into the discomfort is what makes us stronger?
Absolutely.
And we're such a weak society because we don't know how to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Touche to that. Last question for you, because I know we got to wrap it up. So say I am a hipster from Austin. I work in a cubicle at Indeed headquarters in Austin, and I hop in my Tesla to come down here and have lunch. What do you want me to feel and think when I leave the experience?
I want to be the ripple effect that has you remember you are part of the whole, a cell in a greater body. And I want you to feel the coherency of that remembrance. And I want you to know that you belong on this planet. I want you to walk out of that cubicle every day, walk out of your front door every day. Like, I belong here. And how do I be the best cell in this body? How do I not be the I conversation, but how do I be the we conversation? Not in a socialist, communist kind of way, but that if each cell in the body is doing the best that it can, then the body is healthy, not dominated from top down, but from individual out.
I love that. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking. And I hope my audience who's listening to this, you guys go check her out. Check her on Instagram. Check out her book that just came out. Order that. I got it. I can't wait to read it. And if you're in Texas, you got to come visit her, support her, eat at her restaurant called The Barn at Sovereignty Ranch. I ate there last night. The food's incredible. And you're helping out a great and a beautiful family and people who are trying to be a part of change in this world. You know, and so you may not think, oh, how just buying some food from a farmer, how's that going to change the world? But it actually is. You know, it is. And you can figure that out yourself by doing some more research and watching her videos on Instagram, reading her book, and supporting farmers all over the world. Wherever you live, support your local farmers, buy from them, get your groceries, your meat, your dairy, your food from your local farmers. It may not be as convenient to go across the street to your Whole Foods, which is 5 minutes away. Maybe you got to drive 20 minutes. That's okay. Start making the change. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Subscribe, like, share, follow. You know the routine. Thanks for listening.